Namaste. For today, there is no presentation because there was so much information to read and digest. And a part of me really wants to be a neuroscientist, like really, but then she's not. And then I thought, let's just have a conversation about these subjects. And I would try to convey some of the ideas that I could grasp and felt that were important and relevant for my own journey, and also taking it as yoga educators, what this could mean to us. But I really look forward to hearing what you have to say and what you grasped of all these concepts. I also took the leisure to invite one of my favorite teachers, Tara Brock. She won't be joining us live, of course, but I did borrow a video from her explaining the structure of the brain, which I found so inspirational and useful. Because again, me trying to explain the brain will take a while. So I took her video. We will be watching her. And so let me pull up my notes. Okay, so I would like to begin today with a welcoming and a centering short meditation. So if you will, take a comfortable space, comfortable seat, and letting the body find what comfortable means this evening at this time. And borrowing from the book, this idea that physical self-awareness is the first step in releasing the tyranny of the past. So using this meditation as an opportunity to befriend the body, to become familiar with the body, to listen to the body, to be with the body as a first step to release an open space. And if it feels comfortable for you to close the eyes, you can do so. If you rather have them open, that's totally fine. And beginning to notice what this phrase, befriending the body, makes you feel. With each breath opening to the experience of this moment, opening to explore your inner world, the world of sensations, the world of feelings. Gentle breath. Noticing if there's a pressure to rush into the breath. Letting awareness slip from thought and allowing your attention to really feel what is happening inside. Allowing attention to really feel beneath emotions. So feeling sensations perhaps of pressure. Noticing if the body has a particular temperature. Perhaps sensing the temperature in the hands, whether it's hot or cold, temperature in the feet. Befriending sensations. Listening to the body. The body as a vessel. Sensing if there's muscular tension wrapping around bones. If there's a tingling in the nerves. Sensing if the heart is wide and open, or is the chest, if the chest is caving in, feeling hollow. Sensing And in doing so, begin to notice if there is a space or an openness for a different set of sensations. So by opening awareness to what the body is feeling now, is there a possibility for openness, for a sense of openness, a sense of softening, of releasing, letting the belly be soft and open, opening space. And taking the next moments to pay attention, almost like taking inventory of the shifts, the subtle shifts that happen when we turn our attention to the sensations in the body. So what happens when we allow us to feel what we feel and know what we know? Befriending the body. Befriending the body. And let your lips soften into a soft smile. And letting that smile ripple through the heart space, the chest, almost as if the heart can smile, the chest can widen, the lungs smile. Letting the hips smile. And also noticing what shifts happen when we allow the body to smile. Befriending. When this feels complete, let the eyes gently open. Let us meet again to explore the contents of part 2. I do want to kind of jump forward to this whole idea of befriending the body. I find it so beautiful, especially in the context of what happens when we lose connection to our body and we lose connection to ourselves, and the body as literally a vessel for our internal experience. So making friends with the body, befriending the body. And I really appreciate how Dr. Bessel van der Kolk presents this notion of befriending the body as the gateway to mindfulness, as a gateway into feeling what we feel and knowing what we know. So interesting. And this as the pathway to agency. So he talks about gaining agency, the sense of control and of decision making, exactly what Koli was saying before we pressed recording of, as an adults, we get to choose agency and learning to be with ourselves, learning to listen to the messages that come through the body are a gateway to agency. So our gut feelings are a signal for us to know what is safe, what is life-sustaining, what is threatening. And it's that gut-wrenching, heartwarming, that beyond the mind sensation that we can't really explain, but we feel. And so our sensory interiority continuously sends us these messages about the needs that our organism has, as well how to evaluate what is going on around us. So saying that, befriending the body, let's then jump back to the beginning of part 2. This is your brain on trauma. Part 2 opens with chapter 4, running for your life, the anatomy of survival. And it opens with a quote from Roger Sperry. Roger Sperry is a neuroscientist. He actually won the Nobel Prize in 1981 when he discovered the right and left hemispheres of the brain. So how the left was responsible for language and articulation, and the right for recognizing words but not articulate words. And the quote is, "Prior to the advent of brain, there was no color and no sound in the universe, nor was there any flavor or aroma, and probably little sense, and no feeling, no emotion. Before brains, the universe was also free of pain and anxiety." So this quote gives to me the sense of, this is the spectrum, the whole spectrum that opens when we have a brain, like a whole range of experiences. So both color and pleasure, but also pain and anxiety. He then Vessel jumps to the story of Noam and the trampoline. You might recall this 5-year-old boy who was present in 9/11 and was able to get out safely and be reunited with his family. And to process the experience, he paints this picture, this drawing, and he explains, people are falling from the buildings. There's fire everywhere. It's a troubling picture. But at the bottom of the picture, he draws a black hole, and so Dr. Vessel asks him, as a family, he's a friend of the family, and he comes over to dinner after 9/11. And he asks the boy to explain what the picture is, and the boy explains, and the black hole is a trampoline that the boy ideated. And the boy explains to Dr. Vessel that next time there's a situation like this and people need to run for safety, they can fall into the trampoline. So Noam is this example that Dr. Vessel uses as, there is a situation, he was able to safely run away from it, be reunited with his family. He was very fortunate. He grew up in a family where love and affection and caregiving was there. And then he was able to process his experience and even suggest a creative idea of what would happen. What could they do if there was a similar situation, right? And so Noam is a great example of how children take cues from their parents. So if he grew up in a home that was loving and caring, then he would be able to process his experience and even have a creative resolution, right? But in contrast to Noam, traumatized people become stuck, and we are stopped in our growth because we cannot integrate new experiences in our lives. And a lot throughout today, I will say we, because it's super relatable. So being traumatized means continuing to organize life as if trauma was still going on. So there is this sense that the situation can't be changed, won't be changed, it's unchanged and immutable, as if every new encounter or every event is contaminated by the past. So after trauma, the world is experienced with a totally different nervous system. It's totally rearranged. So the survivors, your energy when surviving a traumatic effect becomes focusing on suppressing the inner chaos at the expense of spontaneous involvement in life. And this is super important. And I'll refer to it because he refers to it over and over again in different terms and in different maps. But this idea that there's something so painful that we need to focus our energy in keeping it away in order to survive. But at the expense of that, then we don't have space or energy for something new to emerge. And that is the work. So this is this discussion is one of the most clearest conversations I have come across about psychosomatic symptoms. And I want to invite you to turn your book to page 53 in chapter 4. If you have your book handy, I will read from it. So in page 53, Running for Your Life, The Anatomy of Survival, there is the drawing by Lysia Sky, and it shows how when the amygdala receives a message, the prefrontal cortex cannot work, and then cannot work properly, and everything from facial muscles to thyroid to heart's lung, larynx, GI tract, adrenal gland, the entire organism works differently. And so this is how we are organized in order to survive. So the brain's primary function, the reason why the brain exists, according to this book, is for our survival. So to help us get through the most miserable conditions and leave everything else secondary. It's just the way it's organized. So the way it works is there's a threat, the brain's alarm system gets turned on, automatically triggers a physical escape that it is beyond the mind saying, I have to run. Like you find the body is already running. Fight, flight, freeze is activated. And if this is not possible, because there are many situations in which this is not possible, if a person cannot run, fight, or find a way to remove him or herself from the situation, then there is a second response, which is that the brain will continue to secrete the chemicals as if it were in danger once the situation is over. So the brain continuously tells the brain, I have to escape, I need to fight, I need to remove myself from the situation, giving those messages to the body. So he gives examples of why you wouldn't, in which case scenario you wouldn't be able to fight, flight, or freeze. You're held down by an object, by a person, you're trapped, there's a fire, you cannot get out, a war zone, you're in a car accident. We have some brain scans that we will be going over from car accidents, very different responses. You're in a domestic violence situation or rape, right? Those are situations where you want to be able to do something, but you physically can't. And this is where the body keeps the score. He explains the brain from top to bottom. And this is the whole, if you read this part, he uses so many metaphors. He uses the thalamus as the cook and the amygdala as the smoke detector. Thalamus cooks, amygdala sees what's happening, preventing smokes or being alert of smokes, creating significance out of events. And this is where we get into brain. Brain structure and brain functioning. And I would love to invite Tara to help us understand the brain structure. So Tara, please go ahead. That's not Tara. I don't know if you heard the little advertisement. There we go. Let me share the screen. Here we go. Can you see? Let me know if you can hear. You can't hear because I'm on my headphones.
A bit about how mindfulness changes the neurobiology of fear?
Sure. One of my favorite ways of describing this is from a colleague and friend, Dan Siegel, who many might have heard of. And he has a kind of metaphor of the hand as a brain. And if you see my hand here, if you close your fist, this is your brain. And if you start looking at it, inspect it, you see the wrist, this is the brain stem or the spinal cord leaning into the brain stem. And my thumb is the amygdala and the limbic system. And the four fingers are the frontal cortex. And the way our brain processes stimuli is that information comes up the spinal cord and it goes in and the brain stem and the limbic system operate together to kind of work with arousal. And then there's a kind of down regulating that happens from the frontal cortex that lets us know, wait a minute, that was then and now is now, and maybe we don't need to react this way. So when the brain is integrated, when everybody's communicating, we're in good shape. Well, what happens when we get stressed and we're not in balance is really interesting because the information comes up, but because we're not really in communication with an integrated brain, you get the stimuli saying, warning, warning, and we flip our lid. We basically lose contact with the part of our brain that has perspective, the part of our brain that's the site of empathy, the part of our brain that's really the site of our moral capacities. When we get triggered and we get caught in fear, we lose access, and then there's just a subcortical looping going on. In other words, we're basically hijacked by our survival brain. So what mindfulness does, and this is the key, is it strengthens the activation in the frontal cortex, and it helps us to reintegrate our brain. So in a moment when we're off, if we can have enough remembrance to notice what's happening and to do a little bit of witnessing, we begin to come online again.
Tara, that was one of the best explanations of brain integration that I've heard. We talk a lot about that the brain needs to be integrated, but so many times we're not really clear on what do we mean by that. And thank you. That was really helpful.
When we start cultivating the muscle of mindfulness, we actually are able to sustain our attention on what's right here, on the wave of the moment, without distractions. There's this ability to remember to be here. And when there's that quality of heart, there's space for the wave to move through. So in terms of the brain, mindfulness directly activates the frontal cortex. And I'll give you an example, Ruth, and all of you who are listening, which is to me a really interesting study that found that a main strategy in mindfulness, which is naming what's here. UCLA discovered that when we name an emotion, that it activates the frontal cortex and it deactivates the limbic system. In other words, we're able to occupy more of that mindful witness and be less tossed around by the waves. And in a similar way, when we're able to regard what's going on with that presence and with that heart capacity, again, rather than that limbic hijack, we're able to inhabit a more whole and integrated sense of our being.
Was that useful? Isn't it great?
Want to live in Los Angeles?
That's funny. So one of the reasons I was telling Janelle, we were talking about the book today, and one of the reasons I want to go back to school is to be able to have conversations with these people, because she's saying that naming the emotion really makes a difference. And yet, what do you do when you can't name the emotion, right? There's a whole section of the book called alexithymia, no words for feelings, right? And he gives several examples of people that, having a bubble bath and being burned is the same feeling. Like people who cannot feel the range of possibility, or the question of how would you feel like if a bus is coming at you? Well, I would just run away. No, not what would you do? How would you feel? I would just get out of the way, right? There's an inability to name or to sense or to connect to feeling. So it's a process, and that's why we're reading and discovering and connecting ideas. So I am glad that was useful. Here we are. So if the primary function of the brain is to assure its safety, our safety, it does it by, number one, generating internal signs that register what our bodies need. So that, signal of I'm hungry, I need rest, I feel like I need protection, I feel like I want sex, I want connection, and I need a shelter, right? So all of these internal signals that registers basic survival needs. Two, our brain helps us create a map of the world to point us to where we need to go to satisfy those needs. Three, generate the necessary energy and actions to get us where we need to be. Four, warn us of dangers and opportunities along the way. And five, adjust our actions based on the requirements of the moment. And in order to satisfy, there needs to be a reliance and a belonging to groups and systems. So there is a real sense of belonging and a trust in humanity. And I want to share with you an anecdote, since we're all friends here, of my experience in New York. I was having a very strong physical symptom, which I thought that I would be able to heal naturally. And so I just took natural pain relievers. And by the time that I finished my self-diagnosed treatment, I felt like I was healed. And I was so successful at listening to my body and working with plants and da, da, da. I was first in the Hamptons. The pharmacy to have a medical see me was packed with people. And so I just preferred to go my way. And the day that I finished the treatment, I was feeling better. I decided I'm going to go to the Met, to the museum. And when I'm in the museum, I start sweating cold, my symptoms get worse, and I need to do something about it. And it was real. Like I had a temperature. I was alone in New York with no sense of space. It's a huge city. And it was one of the best experiences that I've had in my life. And I'm saying that obviously in retrospect, because at the moment it was harsh, but it was exactly these steps. There is a physical symptom. I am in massive pain. I need to trust in a greater sense of belonging to a global community and have a doctor give me antibiotics. Like that's just, this is what needs to happen. And so I was going through this book and it was like, yes, 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 yes. So there was a call for help. My dream was to like walk peacefully through Central Park and have a coffee and explore this Upper East Side. Well, I was able to see the whole Upper East Side because I needed to find a CVS that had a minute clinic. So I did it in a mode of survival, but I did enjoy it. And at the end of the day, after visiting like 4 different minute clinics and my insurance not working and blah, 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 I was able to take the medication and the infection went away in a matter of 5 days. And it wasn't about the medicine. I'm not talking about a medicine. I'm not talking about my infection. I'm talking about there's a need. Do I have an inner sense of agency that can guide me through this process by myself in order to get myself back to stability? Can I trust in a greater sense of belonging that I can receive help? Can I ask for help? Can I walk myself to this place? All these questions. So there's so many little examples of our daily lives in which these functions, we go through them as a checkbox. And that sense of belonging, I feel, speaks to our experience in yoga and meditation. When you feel safe and loved, your brain becomes specialized in exploration. If there is safety and love, you want to play. You want to cooperate. You want to be a part. You are a part. There is space for creativity. Noam draw a trampoline so that people had where to fall when there was another dangerous situation and people needed to fly off buildings. When there is not that sense of safety and when there is not that sense of love, meaning when we feel frightened and unwanted, the brain specializes in managing feelings of fear and abandonment. And usually it is that fear of feeling fear. And I have countless experiences where really I'm afraid of being afraid. It's unbearable. Fear is unbearable. And what is beyond that fear, or what happens when we cross the threshold of fear, the threshold of pain? There's something quite liberating. And this is how our brain develops. It is formed and it develops in a use-dependent manner. So that is what neuroplasticity is. Like neurons that fire together, wire together, the brain continues to make connections according to feelings of safety and love, or fear and feeling like you don't belong, or feeling that you are unwanted. And I mean, there's so much more that I wish I could fully grasp and be able to convey articulately, but I'm not a neuroscientist. And again, I'm trying to focus on what I understood. And again, I look forward to hearing what you say. It was something I did grasp and thought it was fascinating, was this notion of mirroring each other and the interpersonal neurobiology, and how crucial this is for the understanding of trauma. As Tara was saying, the frontal lobes and prefrontal, because it's not only just the frontal, prefrontal, are the seat of empathy. And there's this very cool experiment that was done in 1994, where monkeys were having their electrical neurowiring neurons tested, and every time that they would have food, then their neurons would wire. And mirroring was discovered because one of the experimenters was working with a platter of food outside. The monkey could see the experimenter working with the food, and his neurons went on in the same way as if they would go on if the monkey was eating. So this capacity to feel what the other person feels, or not, I don't need to have the lime in order to have my mouth salivate, right? And so when we are in sync, we tend to stand or sit in similar ways. There is There is a dance of reciprocity. There is a dance of attention. There is a dance of resonance. There is this rhythm that we follow. Somebody feels joy, it is transmittable. And something that I found really interesting is treatment, psychological treatment, needs to reactivate that capacity to safely mirror and be mirrored. So when I see somebody having joy, how beautiful it would be that I can partake in that joy selflessly. It doesn't have to be about me. And also how amazing it would be if I can resist being hijacked by others' negative emotions. So that is crucial. Helping people develop their capacity to be empathic, and yet also to remove themselves of situations where their energy is being drained by someone else's negativity or somebody else's whirlwind of emotions. And we can only get along with others, with seeming others, other people, only if we can accurately gauge whether their intentions are benign or dangerous. So even a slight misreading of somebody's expression, of somebody's response, of the way somebody's standing, right? All of these things go on so quickly. Even a slight misunderstanding can lead to painful misunderstandings. Even a slight misreading of somebody's gestures can lead to painful misunderstandings. That's what I meant to say. At home, at work, on the street, meeting somebody new, learning to read. Then we move to controlling the stress response, and the metaphor of the watchtower. So the frontal lobes being that witness consciousness, if you will, that can discern. Is the smell of smoke signaling me that I need to leave the building right now? Or is it that I have the steak in too high of a flame, right? Here is where he describes mindfulness for the first time as being able to hover calmly and objectively over thoughts, feelings, and emotions with that witness consciousness. I am not sure if I was able to understand the difference between top-down regulation and bottom-up regulation. So if any of you have anything to say about that, I would really appreciate it. I do understand that bottom-up is more of an unconscious, visceral standpoint of regulation, like breathing. But I'm not sure if I'm missing something. So he describes top-down regulation as strengthening the capacity of the watchtower to monitor your body sensations. So ways of doing top-down regulation, mindfulness meditation, and yoga can help with this. Oopsie. And then top-down, that's top-down, and bottom-up, recalibrating the autonomic nervous system through breath, movement, or touch. Do you see where my question is? Like the top down is mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. Bottom up, he says, breathing, movement, or touch. So my question is, what is the difference? Like, is yoga not movement? Is yoga not breath? Is mindfulness not breath? Does that make sense? Did you also question the same thing? Shall we move on to advanced?
I felt like it was a little confusing to me as well. I was just looking at the picture though, and I feel like that helped me a little bit, like with the caption I don't know if it does for you as well on 63. Structures in the emotional brain decide what we perceive as dangerous or safe. There are two ways of changing the threat detection system: from the top down via modulating messages from the medial prefrontal cortex, not just prefrontal cortex, or from the bottom up via the reptilian brain through breathing, movement, and touch. So I felt like that was a little different than what you said.
Yeah, so I thought that top down was like, I'm sitting here and now like with my mind, I'm thinking of what my foot feels like. And so I'm sensing my foot with my thought, where bottom up is I step on something sharp with my foot. And that's where the sensation comes from. It starts with my foot and comes right to my brain. That's how I saw it.
That's good.
It's just where the sensation begins. So
Thank
either
you
begin.
so much.
Yeah.
That makes absolute sense. That is why then touch is a way of regulating bottom up. And now this makes so much sense because there's the case of this woman, her name starts with an S. I have her written down farther along, but she cannot feel when somebody's touching her foot. And massage therapy is her way of regaining a sense top down. Thank you so much, Coley. That makes so much sense. I really appreciate that.
What you think of the reptilian brain, that's not our thinking, you know, that he refers to that. And that's, as Coley said, that's your reaction to something. It's not your thought process.
Thank you, Jenny. He also says that breathing is one of the few functions that happen both under conscious and autonomic control, which it's obvious. I mean, we breathe when we are asleep. We breathe when we're working and don't know that we're breathing. We breathe when we're having a conversation. I'm breathing right now and I'm not telling myself to breathe. But it was so good to read it and to do that little exercise of like, oh, I'm actually breathing. That was conscious. That was unconscious. Psychologists usually try to help people use insight and understanding to manage their behavior. However, neuroscience research shows that very few psychological problems are the results of defects in understanding. And I love this. It's not that you don't understand. Most problems originate in pressures from deeper regions in the brain that drive our perception and our attention. When the alarm bell of the emotional brain is signaling danger, no amount of insight will silence it. And that is like music to my ears, because having such a strong foundation in meditation, in mindfulness, in psychotherapy, and still watching myself go through triggers, and it just makes sense. It is not understanding. It is self-regulation. It is the brain. It's not a matter that I don't grasp it in concepts. It's a matter of embodying and regulating. It's a matter of deeper than thought. It's the nervous system, right? And so the nervous system involved with the gut, the heart, the lungs. And when it's dysregulated, there's pain and there's discomfort. I have like 3 more slides to go over, and it's 8:10 here. Is it okay? We continue? Okay. He talks about dissociation and reliving trauma, and this is where we meet Stan and Ute. I don't know if that's the way I pronounce her name. They are a couple that are they're driving, and there is a massive car crash accident. It's like 80 cars in a row. And they are a very interesting case because they're both in the same car. They're both in the same car crash, same conditions. And Stan's brain scan post the event is totally different from Ute's. And what happens is that Stan is proactive when the crash happens. He tries to help Ute get out. He tries other people to get out of the car crash. He tries to help, be of service. Ute, on the other hand, is totally paralyzed. And when she tries to relive that traumatic experience, she has no access to it. It's total numbness. Whereas Stan, when he relives it, he feels the pressure, the threat, the adrenaline. And so Ute's case is a great lead to what dissociation is. Dissociation is the essence of trauma. Reliving the trauma can feel worse than the trauma itself, because when you're in a traumatic situation, there is a beginning and there is an end to the trauma. Whereas people who have PTSD can just have a flashback, unannounced. They're washing dishes, a memory comes up. They're driving, a memory comes up. There is no way of knowing when it will happen. So reliving it feels worse. And it is constantly making us fight against unseen, dangerous situations. And it is exhausting, and it is depressing, and it is weary. And most of those reliving situations are irrational reactions. They are totally out of people's control, right? And that is what makes people feel like they don't belong to the human race. So he gives so many examples that just make my heart feel so compassionate, like people who are throwing a birthday party for their kids and they don't feel anything. People who are numb when somebody dies, when a loved one dies. That sense of numbness, not being able to access, is tormenting to people who feel that way, who feel numb because they feel like they don't belong. And this reminds me, this was the whole lead into Tara Brach and explaining the brain. This reminds me of her work, because one of the things that I will never forget of studying with her is this feeling belongs. This belongs. Helping people really see that their emotions and their sensations belong, even if it's numbness. Numbness belongs. Because all of these sensations, or the lack of sensations, have their origins in that traumatic experience. The biggest challenge for people who opt for depersonalization is that they have so much more difficulty being alert and alive. And yet it is an unavoidable task if people want to recapture their lives. So while reliving trauma is dramatic, frightening, and even self-destructive, over time, a lack of being present can be even more damaging to people. And I would love to bring in to this conversation Tara Brach's technique. RAIN is something that I've shared with some of you in the past. RAIN is an acronym for recognize, R, A, allow, I, identify or investigate or inquire, and N, nurture. So recognize, allow, identify, investigate, inquire, and nurture. It's a very graspable word. It's a soothing word. And it is a technique a mindfulness technique of being with what is and allowing those sensations to be heard and to be nurtured. You begin by recognizing the feeling, recognizing the sensation, recognizing, oh, there's pressure. I feel pressure. Okay. Can you allow the pressure to be there? You don't have to fight it off. You don't have to feel lighthearted. You feel numb. Allow the numbness and begin to inquire into the numbness. And usually there's a massive amount of pain, pain. Nurture. Begin to create that sense of safety for you. Begin to create that sense of loving presence. And this leads us into the part of chapter 4 that talks about learning to live in the present. So if that technique, Rain, inspires you to practice it on your daily life or share in a meditation or a yoga practice, I can share more resources with you. Because it really, really anchors one in the present. And the thing is that when we can't fully be here, then we go to those places where we did feel alive, just like Polly was saying, what is familiar, even if those places are filled with horror and misery. So the same case of this woman that couldn't feel her foot, that massage therapy helps her. She would pick at her skin and she couldn't stop. And it's because that's what made her feel alive. She could feel something. It was better than feeling nothing. And so learning to feel and then learning to derive pleasure from ordinary things like taking a walk, cooking a meal, playing with kids. There is a capacity to belong. And if not, then life passes by. And he here lays out his intentions of therapy, which I found really beautiful. He says that we must, above anything, help our patients to live fully and securely in the present. Then we go on to chapter 5, body-brain connections. Whew, enough of brain. I mean, everything is brain, but that was dense. That was a dense chapter for me to figure out how I would convey it in this book group. Chapter 5, body-brain connections. You see how my nervous system changed? Challenge is over, part 4. Chapter 4 is over, chapter 5. Okay, so in chapter 5, we immediately get introduced to Charles Darwin's expressions of emotions. Dr. Vessel speaks about the common work of Charles Darwin as Origins of the Species, but then this other book has amazing information that informs us of how interrelated and interconnected our systems are. And for Darwin, mammalian emotions are fundamentally rooted in biology. They are indispensable. They are an indispensable source of motivation and action. Emotion, the word emotion etymologically comes from the Latin emovere, which means to move out. Emotion, emovere, to move out. So emotions give shape and direction to whatever we do. And their primary expression is through the face and through the body. And these facial and physical movements communicate our mental state and our intentions to others. So an anger expression or a threatening posture cautions us to back off. Whereas when we see that somebody's sad, it attracts care and attention. Or when there's a sense of fear, when there's fear, there's a sense of helplessness and alerts to danger. And there's this really cool 2 pictures of a man sneering and then a dog with the tooth raised, and this like mammalian response. That gives us the understanding that there's an instinct, and that just by seeing somebody's facial expressions, even in a conversation between two people, even if you don't hear the words, you can sense there is tension, there is relaxation. Their postures indicate connection, or their tone of voice indicate that something's soft, right? So you can pick up on the quality of the relationship that people are having by just instinctively sensing what the body is expressing. And fundamental functions of emotions, the fundamental function of emotions is to initiate movement that will restore the organism to safety and equilibrium. To move, I feel, therefore this needs to move. Darwin talks about the pneumogastric nerve. So essentially, with the information that Darwin had at the time that he developed this work, the pneumogastric nerve is essentially the polyvagal nerve that we know now. He's saying the heart, the gut, and the brain are intimately intertwined and related. So the vagus nerve registers heartbreak and gut-wrenching feelings, literally as such. When a person is upset, the throat gets dry, the voice becomes tense, the heart speeds up, respiration becomes rapid and shallow. One of the things that I am finding with this book is that there are multiple sets of the same information presented in different terms. So after talking about Darwin and his understanding of the connection between the heart, the lungs, and the brain, we then get introduced to Stephen Porges or Porges. Need to research the pronunciation of his last name, but he is a very important person because he is the one that can that studies the vagus nerve and how it interacts with all of our organs and how it sends information back to the brain. And he is also the one that discovers that, and this is why it's so key to understanding trauma, he's the one that discovers through studying people that go through the same event, how they have a range of responses. So there's a plane crash, 2 people lose consciousness, 2 people have a panic attack, and 2 people help others evacuate. Stan Anut's car crash, right? Stan can activate his fight, flight, and help, and try to proactively get out of the situation. Ute is frozen and unresponsive. So what is it that accounts for this spectrum of responses? What is it that allows one person to be focused and in the same situation, another person to be collapsed and another person to be frantic? That's the polyvagal nerve, and that's what love is. I wanted to play that song of "What's Love Got to Do with It, Got to Do with It," because the polyvagal nerve is a neural love code, literally said here. It allows for neuroception. Neuroception is described as the capacity to evaluate relative danger and safety in one's environment. So a lot of the work with trauma survivors is helping them to respond appropriately to danger, but even more to recover the capacity to experience safety, relaxation, and true reciprocity. We will do anything to replace overwhelming emotion with definable sensations. So that, again, that work of this belongs, this feeling belongs. He talks about Ivan Pavlov and the instinct of purpose. A very interesting study of the dogs that get trapped in a cage in a flood. And when the building is not flooded anymore, the dogs continue to act as if they were in danger. And they literally function totally different after the event. So they don't respond the same to their caretakers. They don't listen to the same commands. They're literally working with a totally different organization in their internal housekeeping. This is where we begin to explore the nervous system, part called A Window into the Nervous System. And he explains the autonomic nervous system divided in the sympathetic, which he says it's the accelerator. So go, move, do, and then the parasympathetic, the brake, slow down, pause, restore, right? And I want to share with you a phrase that got said to me in a therapy session last week, and I was dying to share with you because I found it so relatable to what we're studying. And it goes like this: you can only go as fast as the slowest part of you can go. You can only go as fast as the slowest part of you can go. And this created so much safety in my system, because there are parts of me that are ready to accelerate and go, but there are parts of me that are quite slow. And as long as these parts continue to be left out and pushed away and neglected, I'm not going to be able to move as fast as I want. So I can only go as fast as the slowest part of me can go. You are safe to go slow, right? You are safe with me. That sense of this is okay. This belongs. And being able to feel safe and seen with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. No doctor can write a prescription for friendship and for love. Thank you all for being my friends. Love and friendship are complex and hard-earned capacities. Gangs, extremist political parties, and religious cults, ashrams, may provide solace, but they rarely foster the mental flexibility needed to be fully open to what life has to offer, and as such cannot liberate their members from their traumas. Well-functioning individuals are able to accept individual differences and acknowledge the humanity of others. And this is what creates society. This is what creates reciprocity, right? I just found that really beautiful. Learning to not only tolerate, but accept and acknowledge and learn from difference. We go into the 3 levels of safety at this part of the book. I'll just briefly touch on it because, again, it just builds on what we've been talking about. 3 levels of safety. So number 1, you can rely to ask for help. So there's a threatening situation. I can call Maggie and say, this is happening. Can you take over next week? There is a capacity to reach out to those around me and say, this is happening to me. Can you help? Right? I need help. When that is not possible, when people are not around, when you cannot reach to others, then the fight, flight, freeze system gets activated. Okay, I'm going to do it by myself. Okay, I need to fight this situation. And this is resilient, and this is what we're literally wired for. But when that cannot happen, again, when we are trapped, when we are being held down, then that is when shutdown happens, because it is so unbearable that I need to dissociate. And that is when depersonalization happens. So we get introduced to Sherry. That's her name, Sherry. I just feel so proud of Sherry, and relate to Sherry. She comes into the office because she picks at her skin. Lots of doctors have tried to treat her in ways that are not working for her. So doctors harness her so that she doesn't pick at her skin and ask her to promise that she will never do this again. She sees Dr. Bessel, she can't even hold eye contact, and it's very hard for him to connect with her. And so he says, maybe try a massage. And the transformation arc that happens when Bessel refers her to see a massage therapist is amazing. Like, Sherry joins a choir, she starts walking outside, and she starts making friends with her neighbors, and she really starts to be engaged in therapy, really starts to do the work. She gets really curious about her behavior, her thoughts, and her feelings, and of course, she stops picking at her skin. But it's a process, right? Like, initially, when she goes to the massage therapist is here with her, and then the massage therapist goes to the end of the table, and Sherry panics because she doesn't know where the massage therapist is. But the massage therapist is holding and massaging Sherry's feet, and she literally cannot feel it. That's when top down, bottom up makes sense. And this is one of my favorite parts of the book, the self-sensing system. We get to learn and appreciate the work of Antonio Damasio. Antonio Damasio, he's a neuroscientist that works with people whose brains are very damaged. And he points out this divide between our sense of self and our sensory life, and our sense of self, our mind, and our body. He says, sometimes we use our minds not to discover facts, but to hide them. And he speaks about the screen. And the screening can work in our favor by enabling us to attend to pressing problems in the outside world. I can block this. Yet it has a cost. It tends to prevent us from sensing the possible origin and nature of what we call self. So Damasio elaborates, and William James, the founder of Western psychology, pretty big deal, he argues that the core of our self-awareness rests on the physical sensations that convey the inner states of the body. Interesting brain fact, all of the brain structures that register background feelings are located near areas that control basic housekeeping functions such as breathing, appetite, elimination, sleep, and wake cycles. In page 96, he says the consequences of having emotion and attention are entirely related to the fundamental business of managing life within the organism, all the housekeeping functions. It is not possible to manage life and maintain homeostatic balance without the data on the current state of the body's organism. If you have a comfortable connection with your inner sensations, if you can give them the opportunity to speak and to give you accurate information, you will feel in charge of your body, your feels, your feelings, your vibes, your feelings, and yourself. And this is the origin of agency, right? Agency is mentioned in chapter 6, page 97, as the technical term for the feeling of being in charge of your life. You have a say, you know where you stand, you know that you have a say in what happens to you, you know that you have some ability to shape your circumstances. However, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside the body. So the self-sensing system is disturbed. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. Body is bombarded by signs. And so as all these signs and warning signs are coming up, we try to push them down, right, in order to survive. In an attempt to control these processes, they often become experts in numbing awareness of what is being played out inside. So we hide from our own selves. He says in page 99, this is all Damasio, Bessel, quoting Damasio. Prema, quoting Bessel, quoting Damasio. The more people try to push away and ignore internal warning signs, the more likely they are to take over and leave them bewildered, confused, and ashamed. People who cannot comfortably notice what is going on inside become vulnerable to respond to any sensory shift, either by shutting down or by going into a panic. They've developed a fear of fear itself. So fear of fear. The price of ignoring or even distorting the body's messages is being unable to detect what is truly dangerous and what is truly harmful for you. And just as harmful, also it doesn't allow us to really understand what is nourishing and what is safe. So the price of ignoring is that we don't have access to self-regulation anymore. We rely on external regulations. This is where alcoholism takes place, substance abuse, and even codependent relationships. And this is the origin of psychosomatic symptoms. He gives an example, an asthma patient. Her name is Sandy. She's mentioned in page 99. Sandy grows up with alcoholic parents that neglect her. She's terrified and she's lonely. And so in order to cope in this situation, she begins to develop a strategy of being extremely respectful and withdrawing herself from scenarios, never having something to say. The other is always right, I'm wrong, right? She becomes deferential to people who she depends on. But every time somebody makes a comment that she doesn't agree with or that is intense, she has an asthma attack. So even though she had learned to ignore her relationship problems and block out the stress signals, they show up in symptoms that demand her attention. So her work was learning to identify the link between sensation and emotion. She starts seeing Dr. Vessel, and he suggested she tries kickboxing so she can get all of that rage and that anger and all of the emotions moving out. And she doesn't, as far as we know, I don't know how Sandy's doing, but for that time that she was working with Dr. Bessel, she doesn't get admitted into an emergency room for her asthma attacks again, because she's able to work through those psychosomatic symptoms. Somatic symptoms are those which have no clear basis and can be found, that there's no traceable origin. And they are ubiquitous in traumatized children and adults. They include chronic back pain, neck pain, fibromyalgia, migraines, digestive problems, spastic colon, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue, and asthma. I feel like I'm reading like the back of a prescription medication. Traumatized children have 50% more asthma than children who grow up in loving homes. So there is a very clear relationship of the body speaking, the body keeping the score. And there is a dilemma in this, because we desperately crave for that which we are afraid of. So we desperately crave touch while simultaneously being terrified of body contact. The mind needs to be re-educated to feel physical sensations, and the body needs to be helped in order to learn to tolerate and enjoy the comforts of being in a body. And so I would like to finish my part in facilitating today by reading the page, if you want to read with me, is page 88. The last paragraph of page 88. The body keeps the score. If the memory of trauma is encoded in the viscera, in heartbreaking and gut-wrenching emotions, in autoimmune disorders and skeletal muscular problems, and if mind, brain, Visceral communication is the royal road to emotion regulation. This demands a radical shift in our therapeutic assumptions. And the cherry on top of the cake, this quote from Rilke. He's one of my favorite poets. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant way into the answer, but live the questions now. This is part 2. I am sure that I missed a lot. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for allowing me to facilitate. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And oh my goodness, I have 5 chats. Joa had to leave and she's back. Jenny, in chapter 5, page 99, interesting, many of my patients respond to stress not by noticing and naming it, but by developing migraine, headache, or asthma attacks. Psychosomatic, yeah. Maggie, I thought that was interesting as well. Maggie, why don't you say something?
Oh yeah, it just made me think of like that, how when you're stressed, like how that affects your digestion, and that like upset stomach feeling you can get if you're nervous before something or fearful, and just like how intertwined that all is. Like that was totally like what came to my mind as well, Jenny. I thought that was really fascinating, just like the different physical manifestations of yeah, this like internal battle and chaos. So yeah, but I would love to hear if you had something else to say about it, Jenny.
This book is, it just speaks to a lot of my own experience as well. I was in a really horrible car accident when I was a senior in high school, and flew out like a club van in the mountains of New Mexico. And just, was okay then, had laceration, hit my head though, flew out a window, hit my head. So when I was in my early 20s, I started just getting dizzy randomly. Like maybe I think the first time it happened, I was driving, well, I wasn't early 20s, I must have been later 20s, because I was driving my kids, just 2 of my little ones, in fog. Like it suddenly became really foggy. And I just felt this, like, almost like a window like slamming shut in my brain is what it felt like. And suddenly I was just dizzy. And I kept going to doctors and just kind of explaining this and saying it's like a migraine, but it's just like this closing off, and the world is just spinning. And I would always say this, like, it feels like what it felt like when I was in the car accident. Like because I was unconscious, but I hit the window and, obviously am dizzy probably when I flew out. I don't know. I mean, I do remember like the spinning, but when not until, so I finally got help through chiropractic, and definitely like I figured it out myself, like how to control this, and by being in tune to my body, like what were the triggers. But anyway, the Stan and Ute story, like, I don't know how her name is pronounced, but that just like hit me so hard, like, because what they physically experienced what they experienced in that accident. And that's just so fascinating. And it's the same with a migraine or an asthma attack. And I had never heard that about asthma before, how that also can be just a stress response, or I mean, all of this it is fascinating. That's it.
Thanks, Jenny. I felt like too, like I was really just continued to be impressed and encouraged. I don't know the word that I want right now, but about or just like how much I continued to see like that theme of curiosity. Like I felt like that quote you read at the end there, like I wrote in my book, like live the questions now. That just to me is like synonymous to curiosity, like maintaining that curiosity. And then I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find the page, but he says, oh, here it is, on 94, when he's talking about like how it was fascinating to see how Sherry benefited from her massage therapy. It says he goes on to say that she became truly involved in her therapy and was genuinely curious about her behavior, thoughts, and feelings. And I was like, well, yeah, like what an incredible shift as well. Like now she's just going in with this curiosity of instead of like, yeah, hating herself and that shame, and how freeing that must have been as well. And just so many different things. Like you could see that with like some of the differing what's the word I want? Like tests and things like that the other researchers like came up with. Like I was like, that was totally born out of like genuine curiosity, and like look at the amazing thing that they, you know, discovered because one person maintained, or you know, multiple people maintained curiosity in a moment instead of just being like, well, that's weird that like people, you know, do that, or like I don't know. I mean, it's natural to ask why, but I just love that. I feel like curiosity makes you want to follow through in a way that's different than simply just being like, well, why is that, you know, or that's strange or something. I just love that continues to, for me, to be such an important aspect in the book that I see.
Thanks, Mags. This comment that you just made reminds me of a class that Horace shared with me today, and it spoke about Esther Hicks. Are you familiar? Are you any of you familiar with Esther Hicks? She Esther Hicks writes quite beautifully spiritual books, and it's a very funny story. I found it really funny because the books that she writes are divine inspiration. So she literally hears a voice and she writes what the voice says. But it all started many, many years ago when she and her partner were meditating every day in the morning for 15 minutes and then in the afternoon for 15 minutes. And over a course of a year, her partner began to see that when they were meditating, she would move her head like she was shaping letters with her nose. That's what her husband observed. Like during their meditations, more and more so, she began to trace letters with her nose. So the husband began to get curious and began to write down the letters that she was writing or dictating. And so what's quite funny about it is that when she accesses this voice, she asks the voice, well, why did you make my head spin and type letters with my nose? Why didn't you just talk to me? And the voice says, because every time I tried to reach you, you would just go back to the breath. And I found that so funny, like, because it's a mindfulness practice that we all encourage, but it is in that non-attachment where mystery arises, right? And I do encourage technique, and I do encourage just setting up a structure but then let it go and be curious. So what you just said, Mags, reminded me of the story from this morning. Like there is something trying to come through, and I just need to get that chaturanga right. And I don't know if it's gonna come true, right? Like it reminded me of that story.
Yeah, like I have something from that I want to share. Can you guys hear me? I have a little bit of noise in the room with me. Perfect. So I thought, number one, I thought it was fascinating how he kind of went over the brain structure, starting with how the first part of the brain to evolve is also where our emotions all come from. And I just thought that's fascinating. And so all of the thoughts, all the rest of what we do is on top of that emotion. So the emotion is such a core part of our body. It's really that connection between body and mind. I thought that was, I thought that was cool to learn, because I probably learned that before, but I don't think I ever, you know how it is. Like sometimes you learn something 100 times and then you finally actually notice it the 100th time. So I thought that was awesome. And then I was thinking about myself, because I would numb myself from emotions too. I think that's a normal response in today's world, is the kind of numb emotions. And then looking at the Latin definition from a movere, and I looked it up more thoroughly, and it says to stir, to agitate, and to move. So it's all of those. And you can't stir something or agitate and try to keep it still. You know, that's impossible. That's what numbing is. It's like I'm trying to keep these emotions still, but that's not possible. So it made me think, like with what you just said, Prema, about the meditation. And instead of, so if I say emotions can't exist, they still exist, but I just quit noticing them. So I quit seeing them. So if I'm in meditation and I say thoughts can't exist, thoughts are still going to be there. I just quit noticing them. Which when you quit noticing them, but they're still there, then suddenly they control you. And so your emotions, you're going to have more emotional responses if you're numb to emotion. You just don't realize that it's an emotional response. So I get really snippy and grumpy, and it's because I'm frustrated and stressed, but I don't realize that. I'm just snippy and grumpy. But I don't notice that I'm doing that. It's just everyone around me that suffers. So it made me think of all of that, and how coming back to having that loving environment of safety, security, where we give ourselves permission to have thoughts and to have feelings and have emotions, really lets us switch from basically from top down and to bottom up, so we can feel everything both ways. I can explore all my emotions from my thought, and I can feel emotions as they come in. So it creates a connection that we may have kind of gotten rid of. So that's what I got out of the 3 chapters today. I thought that was kind of cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe.
That reminds me of like what she was saying in the video, like how she was saying like you kind of like how what'd she say, like you like flip your lid, you know, like it like, but when you're like integrated, like what you just said, Chloe, that's what made me like think of that like full integration where it's just kind of like reciprocal or feeds among like within itself or whatever. That was, yeah, it's so cool. I love that. Stefan, after like from like once you had this experience, like did anything like within this reading like give you any, I don't know, food for thought or I don't know, I'm just curious.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, well, I just love being with you all on this Zoom. I don't know. I don't really feel like I have anything intelligent to say. I just this week has been so. This last week has been so kind of overwhelming to me. But I do feel like this weight has been lifted. Whenever I felt like I was kind of selling out for money and not really believing in what I was doing. So I think that there's certain amounts of suppressed emotions or numbing yourself, or even without the use of drugs or alcohol. But I will say that it's just, I caution people about yoga. Be careful, because as you start paying attention and you get past the physical body and you start going down a little bit deeper, and then you're in an emotional body, and then that awareness brings lightness into the darkness and the dark areas of your whole existence. And then it probably will cause some change. It'll definitely cause a shift in perceptions. It'll definitely, you know, all these are true in the book. And if anything, you just learned for me in that book is that there's so much that I don't know. And sometimes you just have to listen and listen to people and understand that it's just can be more complex than you can imagine. And I would never be able to understand this book as well without you all and your perspectives. I mean, and just being smart. Again, I've never been in a book club, but this is amazing. And I don't know. I'll see what happens next week. Tune in for my next paper. I don't know. So we'll see.
What is your family supportive, Stefan?
Very much so. Yeah, especially my daughter and my wife. Yeah, I mean, they're like, okay, well, you're still gonna need to figure something out. And I'm like, you're right. Yeah, I do. But I will. And I said pretty soon I'm going to just be a full-time, part-time yoga instructor. It'll be all right, but we'll see. So I don't know. But I do feel like lighter, and I feel like I will work. I work all the time anyway. I mean, it'll be fine. I don't know. I'm not really scared. I'm looking forward to more. And it actually came from a meeting where I was with on that Monday. I could feel it in my heart. I was having this kind of like an anxiety attack, and it was from stress to my. So then going back to, well, you got to practice what you preach. You're practicing everything to listen to yourself and listen to your body, and you're just hitting override, and it's gonna catch up with you. And so, now I don't know. I feel just a lot of mixed emotions, but definitely lighter in my heart, so we'll see.
Stefan, can you share, you had this meeting, you felt the pressure in your heart, you recognized there was an anxiety, like there was this response, and
right.
You weren't in tune with what was happening, you weren't resonant with it. Did you respond immediately by saying, I want to quit?
No,
or did you take your time, went home, processed, and returned?
It's so funny because it was almost like I just went outside of my body. Like I felt, and I didn't respond to the stimulus. This was the department heads meeting. So I have 70 employees or so. I'm used to high stress situations, but at this time, it just was like I almost said, I remember it just clearly, you can all kiss my ass, my hardworking ass, and I'm done. But I didn't. So I just refrained from talking completely. Like they almost said, like it looked like I was a ghost, and I just tried to focus on my breath to stop my heart from going. So if from yoga, if you could control your breath. So if you've gone too far, you're doing a twist and throttle back, regain your breath. So as I've gone too far, regain my breath. Well, it took me a little while, and then I just removed myself. And from when we got finished with the meeting, it didn't last much longer as I didn't speak anymore. And I went and I wrote my letter of resignation, which is about 4 paragraphs. And then I went home and I slept on that. And then the next day I turned it in, and we had an emergency meeting, and they're like, well, what? So I just felt like, the other day I looked out at the golf course, and there was these big fat people driving around these electric buggies, and my phone rang. It was 8:30 in the morning, and although we had a bar set up and breakfast was served at 6:30 for this particular golf tournament, they're want to know where the bartender was. And I didn't have anybody scheduled till 9 because I thought that was reasonable at 9 a.m. now, not 9 p.m. And I just looked out and I looked at them, and they looked like little like aliens, like a different planet, driving around in these little electric carts and walking around. I don't know. I just like, wow, man, this is just not right. And these are the same people that are just sucking all the corporate profits from all, they don't even really have job. I mean, I don't even know what they do. They're bankers, and they take money from everybody else who in the real world, they can't get above $13 or $15 an hour, and they're just raping the world. I mean, I don't know. I just had this feeling that, you're just as bad as them if you're selling out for the money. Quit being a puss and move on. Let's go. Let's do something else, and that's what happens. And surround myself with people that are more loving,
That's cool.
So I don't know. And then today I got that call about helping some trauma victims, or cooking for them, and then it being a part of the, whatever this, I don't know,